So, Billy, I think it's a great time to get together here in June during International Women in Engineering Month. And you brought up a great idea. Hey, why don't we get together and talk about a podcast around strong women in the oil field? And with June being a month to celebrate women in our space, I think your idea was great timing for us to get together. So, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Jason. No, and I agree. I've been in the industry for 25 years, and I've seen a lot of very strong, successful women. And, it's encouraging, and I think we need to recognize it.
Why do you think it's important to highlight women in our space when you look at, oil field engineering, operations, the service side, which you and I have been in for many years, and how we met almost over 15 years ago?
Yes, we did.
Almost 20 years ago. Oh, my gosh. And, when you look at just business execution and how the roles of women in our space are so critical and important to so many different phases. Kind of go into a little bit about that. And probably the reason why you kind of brought this idea up to begin with was really to highlight a lot of the strong attributes and strong character that we have, not only here at OSP, but in our industry from the female perspective in a very male-dominated industry.
Right. So that is correct. Over decades, the industry's been a very male domain, but it's transferring over to a lot of women, and we have to we need to encourage and recognize all of their contributions, and you see women in leadership roles and multinational corporations. And, you see engineers that, that are engineering complex drilling sites. Mm-hmm. So there's, from that to, just to the day-to-day, making sure that all the details of everything gets taken care of.
No, you bring up a good point there because, as you have a unique spot, not just here at OSP, but throughout the years, working with different layers and levels of management organizations where you've been a part of the sales, the commercial side, right, marketing, operations, engineering, and understanding really the full spectrum of each one of those divisions. And when you bring up, women in the oil field, a couple things come to mind for me is, our first customer was a woman that was leading a land operation in West Texas that was like, hey, we're looking at getting better. We want better service. We want better technology. What are you guys seeing offshore that we could utilize here on U.S. land that would help us become more efficient? So, literally our first customer was a woman who was really driving initiatives on engineering, technology, efficiencies, stuff that wasn't necessarily just the way it was always done in Pecos County, right? And then if you look at the tier ones that we work with Shell, BP, Exxon, Chevron, there's so many women there at the tier ones offshore that are, a large part of the decision-making process. You look at the upper management, and, when you're looking at how women are now in very, unique spaces and roles to really contribute. What do you think are the qualities, from your perspective that really stand out, when we sit next to each other and that really, showcase like how women really bring things, to the table, in our space?
So I have worked in a lot of different roles, and I've worked with a lot of different, departments. And what I see is like the organizational glue it's kind of like a big web because there are so many details and moving parts just to get, say, one job done. It touches so many different departments. And, it's the teamwork is so amazing, when you sit back and you watch it all unfold.
You bring up one of the questions I wanted to ask you, and I was looking down, was kind of like those, what are some of the ways that women contribute, to the success of the teams? And, when we talk about like the job tickets and invoicing and technical reporting, stuff that you and I deal with on the commercial front. But when you look at, the roles and kind of, I love how you say the glue. One of the things I was curious is like, how do you see the way, women keep people, priorities, communication moving in a fast-paced environment that we live in?
I think a lot of that is the teamwork, and I think it's, because there's so many moving parts. It's kind of like project management. You have to have communication throughout all the teams to know where you're at. As it's moving from start to finish, and also have patience to see it go through. And so,
no, you bring up a great point, and I think a lot of people, it's really about that strength that a lot of I think that you bring to our team, which is not necessarily being loud and strong. It's
right.
being dependable, reliable, consistent, and that's strength, right?
Yes.
And so it's really that for me, it's just having that follow through, and again, being part of the team, being that glue that ties us together, and then just showing up every day, right? And I think that that's a great trait. Whereas in our opinion, and we've joked about this, there's a lot of times that, from the male side, I feel like one of the things that we struggle with always is ego. And I feel like oftentimes, and not just because of sometimes maybe you're just outnumbered, but it's like you can just take the ego out, right?
Exactly.
And it's just really about work and performance, and again, the glue that brings all these personalities together in a very male-dominated, industry. I would say from our perspective, and you and I have had the pleasure of working together through 4 or 5 different companies now. I guess 3 or 4 for sure.
Yep.
And all again on the technology side of the service business in our space. And what would you feel like people should really understand about the pressure that you feel, not just as a woman, but just you as your role, and how a woman shows up in a pressure cooker every day in our industry, where one day it's $100 oil, next day it's negative 36. You've gone through multiple ups, downs, reduction in force, salary, changes, and what would you say people should understand about this industry as a woman, and how you have to show up every day?
There is a lot of pressures, and you have to have, you got to be strong. You have to have confidence in what you're doing, and because that's, they can sense that, if you don't have the confidence. But also, you have to own up to your, to your mistakes. If you make a mistake, own up to it. It's okay. But they're going to respect you more by doing that than if you were to not. So
Absolutely. And look, there's a lot with that. I mean, I think confidence, absolutely. I mean, that's with anybody. And I think especially women, because, if you've put in the time and you're there and you know what you're doing, you got to be confident. You got to raise your hand. You got to speak up. And again, engage, be part of the team, be that glue.
Yep.
And, when you look at, again, this week with International Women's Day in Engineering, how do you feel like, you bring up confidence, how do you feel like, what kind of support women need coming up in this space? And you mentioned confidence. What else do they need to really succeed in this space if they're looking at a career in oil and gas, in the service role, or in the upstream, on the operator side?
So there's a lot of opportunities, for women to move up in the ladder, and a lot of great training. Get certified. Get be more proactive, and try and build your skill set, because that goes a long ways.
I love what you said. I mean, just because you work for an engineering company or you may be an engineer doesn't mean you have to have an engineer in your title to work in a very technical space. As you know, OSP is a service company in the drilling, completion, intervention, abandonment phase. And, part of us is really bringing technical engineered solutions to the space. But again, we're focused on service, right? And so a lot of our engineers are actually service hands. So we're able to bring a very tactical, methodical way of doing things to the field. And we also have guys in finance and girls, and as well as sales and marketing that have a technical background. Right. And so there's so many things, to your point, in our business that you can get involved in on the operational side, the technical side, engineering side, finance, corporate, that are really creating a great career for people and women in the space.
Right.
And, so as you look at, a company like OSP where, really engineering doesn't stop at the design, what is the kind of flexibility here that you like about career paths and open doors and, just kind of where you see things going from your perspective?
So, I think there's, like I said, there's a lot of opportunities. And, there's nobody here that's going to say, no, you can't, take this class or do this or, so I think that, you just have to be upfront with, with whoever you're working with and let them know that it's, you do want to succeed. You want to move up.
Sure.
And
so one of the things I wanted to ask you from my perspective is, what do you feel like not just OSP, but companies can do better in supporting women and in their careers, whether, they have 20 plus years of experience or they're just starting out where they're like, hey, where is this going for me and, in my career? What is some of the things that companies can do better? And what are some of the things that young women can do as they start off?
So again, learn everything you can. Ask questions. There's never a dumb question. So, just by asking questions and, trying to learn and, continue your growth. And also, I think on the flip side of that, management can also, they can, respond to to their employees, to the women, encourage them, and let them know that appreciate their achievements. Maybe through an award or through an announcement. And there's a lot of industry things that they can do, such as get membership to there's organizations that they could belong to, and get connected with other women in the industry.
No, that's a good point. You bring up a couple good things, and from your experience, and you mentioned management, and you and I have had the pleasure of working together for quite some time, so we've been able to communicate fairly openly, probably more than you would like sometimes. But what advice would you give? Not just me, and you've shared some good advice with me sometimes. More on the critical advice, which is good. That's what we would need to hear is an outside perspective that wants the best for the organization, the team. What advice would you give to other leaders about listening to women in the organization and giving them that voice?
So I'm sitting in a great place because, like you said, we've worked together for a long time, and I've worked with, a lot of the people in our organization. So, I get the respect that I feel that I deserve. So, I have no complaints. So I would say to you guys to
Yeah.
keep doing what you're doing. But to, other companies, make sure you're listening. Make sure that, you're taking care of your people and, give them the opportunity to succeed.
Yeah, and you say other companies, but in my opinion, it's other leaders, right?
Other
It's,
leaders,
yeah, and
yes.
because it's up to them to really set the tone about what the company stands for, and it's to understand A, what the company really stands for, and then B, displaying that, making sure others have that voice, have that confidence to step up and raise their hand, and making sure people have, we talk about humble, hungry, smart, have the humility to raise your hand, right? And just be like, hey, I have a question. Or, I want to offer up something and understand they're not going to be shut down. It's going to be listened and, and replied to in some manner, but definitely respected. And, again, I appreciate that, number one, because I feel like, we continue to strive to be better listeners and give people a voice here. And so, I think we can do better, but we can also lift others up and really support their growth. Depending on whatever that is, right? What advice would you give to young women considering a career in oil and gas, whether it be from an operator or service side, but knowing that there's so many roles: operations, sales, commercial, engineering to the technical side that you can go down.
So I think this is a great opportunity, and there are so many successful women in the industry, and whether it's in a leadership role, engineering, accounting, whatever it is, but I think you should go for it, and do your research and talk to people, and because there's so many opportunities. So,
what would you say? Don't be intimidated by, because I think it's tough, right? It's a daunting task when you look at our industry as a whole. Then you look at what we do. What would you say? Like, don't be intimidated by this.
So that's a good question, because when I first came into the industry, I was very intimidated by lack of skill, and because I had never worked in an organization or industry like this. So, but just because you don't have the experience doesn't mean you can't learn. And, get the skills you need. It'll come. Just keep pushing.
It's funny that you say that. So you say, build that confidence, go get the skill set. It's one of, I wanted to ask you is like, how can women build that confidence and that experience earlier in their career? And it sounds like from what you're saying, just be aggressive.
That's right.
Raise your hand. Don't feel, like you can't put your name in the hat for the next opportunity,
Right.
And I love that because, and again, we're talking about women, but as you and I talk about, we're very, the meritocracy here is we love a performance. Right. And whether you're a man or a woman, you need to show up to your organization and perform every
Absolutely.
day, right? And you and I have a lot of conversation about that. And I love, sharing that passion with you. But as we're talking here today is, the women, especially the young women looking at building, and this is kind of coming from you. I can't, I can't attest to this, but I can definitely appreciate it because I've seen how successful you've been over your career by building confidence because you put in the work, you put your name in the hat, you got involved, you went to the rig, you understood operations, and it built that, not just confidence for you, but other people give you a lot of credibility from that, right? And again, that's why it's easy to listen to you because you've been able to, you've traveled, you've seen this, you've heard this, and not just in sales and marketing, but across the board, right?
Exactly.
So, I guess tying it back in for the young, women starting their career in this industry is, raise your hand, put your name in the hat, and don't be afraid to, take a step out, right?
Exactly.
and push yourself, push your limit, and grow your horizons. Right?
Yep. Sky's the limit.
Yeah. So if if people really remember like one thing about this conversation, and about strong women in the oil field, it's kind of like how you approached me in the hallway, like, hey, we should do something about strong women in the oil field. What would you say? You really kind of want to, our listeners, our family here at OSP to take away from that.
Be confident and be strong. Your expertise is an operational necessity.
No, it really is, Billy. And I appreciate you again for coming by, pulling me to the side and having this conversation. And we're glad that we can really highlight women and your own personal journey here at OSP this month, and really continue to bring stories like this to the organization and support everyone's voice.
It's been awesome. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate it, and I enjoy working with you.
Yep, same here, Billy. Talk soon.
All right.
Cheers.